Hi, Dan. Another week in
Hey, how are
Vancouver.
you? Yes.
City Council meeting this week and talking about a topic that is near and dear to the hearts of many Vancouverites, and that is our trees. What were they on about?
Yeah, so at City Council this week, at the council meeting yesterday, we had a presentation from the city's urban forestry staff. So this is people from different departments, including the parks, um, and they were kind of updating City Council on this forestry strategy. It's basically the strategy was created about 10 or so years ago, and then it was updated about 5 years ago. So this is kind of the third update. And one of the things that was in the update was um, they're increasing their target, ramping up the target for tree canopy cover. So what percentage of the city's landmass is covered in a tree canopy? And the previous target was 22%, and now they're ramping that up to 30%.
Hmm.
So as part of this as well, though, so a few weeks ago, before yesterday's presentation, so council unanimously approved this update to the strategy. But a few weeks ago, there was a memo that came from city staff to council, and one of the things they touched on was the idea of adding 100,000 net new trees by 2026. So some people may remember this is something that ABC Vancouver campaigned on. It was one of their 92 or 94 point one of the promises in their 94-point campaign plan was add 100 net new trees to the city by 2026. As it turns out, it doesn't sound like that's going to be possible. So since the election, both city council and the parks board, at a time when the park board still had an ABC majority, they both had, passed motions directing staff to get to work on this, or at least, investigate it and report back. City staff have kind of reported back saying they're only currently planting about 2,000 total trees per year. And in a given year, they might actually remove that many or even more. So they're not even necessarily adding net new trees every year. They try to, but they don't always. So were kind of explaining that to try to add 100,000 net new trees in the next few years would be a really dramatic, it would cost a lot, and they don't even know how much it would cost. And it would mark us like a significant change from what they're currently doing. And so that 100,000 target, it sounds like they're going to forget about that. And they're going to also just kind of shift the focus, instead of focusing on the number of new trees planted, focus on the percentage of tree canopy cover.
Right. Okay. And that's important. We know because our colleague Nathan Griffith has
Yes.
written a few stories about
Yes.
tree canopy and what that does, especially on hot days and during
Yes.
heat waves. They provide the kind of cooling effect that you really need, and if you don't have it, you can get people, I mean, to the point of dying if they're not if they're exposed to too long, I guess.
Yeah, no, and death is a real risk, especially for sort of more vulnerable people or seniors. In 2021, Vancouver had that, sort of the Lower Mainland was hit with a heat wave, and the statistics showed we had a number of people die in Vancouver. And when they looked at the maps for where those deaths occurred, it was people living in areas with basically with less forest canopy. They were at a higher risk of dying from heat-related illness. And the city actually had some maps that were part of this report yesterday, and they show a pretty stark divide, like heat maps, and you can see
Right.
where's the areas where
Like Nathan had done stuff like that. Yeah.
Nathan had done
Right.
stuff like that. And Nathan looked beyond just city of Vancouver. He looked at metro region,
Right.
and a similar
Right.
pattern plays out in Surrey and Burnaby and other parts of the metro region, where greener, leafier areas tend to be more affluent, and they tend to be cooler. And then areas that are lower income, poorer, tend to have more roads, more concrete, fewer trees, and they're lower income. And often that's associated with with worse health outcomes. So people's mental health, their physical health. And also I did a little bit of research yesterday. This didn't really I kind of briefly alluded to it in the story, but it's not unique to Metro Vancouver either. Similar patterns play out in cities across North America, maybe in other continents too. I'm not sure about that, but it's not a sort of unique thing to hear. And it's maybe something that people didn't think about as much or as intentionally in previous generations. But it's certainly something that public health officials and city planners and stuff are wrapping their heads around now. So that is one of the things we heard yesterday, is the city's not just trying to just plant a whole bunch of trees just for the sake of getting up the numbers. They're trying to get them in they're saying the right tree in the right place at the right pace. So they are trying to be strategic about where they put these trees. They mentioned yesterday some specific efforts to plant trees in like the 300 block of East Hastings and the 700 block of East Hastings, in the downtown east side, an area that has been historically very tree deficient, not a lot of green space, a lot of lower income people living there who in a lot of cases have other health conditions. And so the city has recently added a bunch of trees in those areas. So if you go down there now, you can see there's a bunch of relatively young, small trees that look like they've been planted pretty recently. And so instead of just planting a bunch of trees in like a big park in the southwest corner of the city where fewer people are going to be around, they're trying to do it in a strategic way where it'll have longer term, benefits and stuff. And of course, this is kind of like a lot of other investments where it costs a bunch of money to plant a tree, especially if you're doing it in an area like East Hastings, where you have to excavate, build a new tree pit, plant the tree. That costs more money than just putting a little seedling in a wide open green park in a less dense area or in a rural area. So, but they're saying, and then also after you plant a new tree, there's a fair amount of money in terms of keeping it watered and keeping it alive those first couple of years. When it starts to really pay dividends is years and years in the future. There's an old saying, like an old axiom that actually came up during yesterday's council meeting. You might have heard it before, that the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time to plant a tree is today.
All right. That's interesting. When it comes to, so much development going on, and we all see, everything from smaller developments to larger towers, and at street level, often you'll see trees, at least in the drawings. Is there a requirement as part of redevelopment for the developers themselves to plant trees?
So there can be, and that's something that came up as well. The loss of trees through development is one of the concerns that the city had with the multiplex program, which is underway, right? So knocking down a single house and building a 3 or a 4-plex in its place, 5-plex. There are some worries about losing trees through that. But when there's bigger developments, like with the Broadway plan, and there are still worries about losing trees through that, but in some cases, knocking down sort of low density housing, like a row of single houses to build one taller building, can potentially open up more space for green space, which in some cases will be open to the public. So there is, through that negotiation, there are opportunities to get new trees, and sometimes, to protect existing trees if they think they're important. Like looking at the existing trees and talking about future trees is definitely a part of that development process. And an example came up in council yesterday where I think he's the associate director of urban forestry, mentioned Oak Ridge. So the massive development at Oak Ridge has resulted in the short term in the loss of a bunch of trees. But he said, but longer term, he said, but that's not going to be forever. Once it's completed, there's going to be a big park, there's going to be green roofs, there's going to be new trees. So in the longer term, now I'm not sure, and I don't recall if he said if it's going to be a net gain or a bit of a loss, or if it's breaking even. I don't remember, but he made the point that in the short term, well, it's a construction site, they definitely lost some green space, some trees. Longer term, there's going to be a bunch of greenery and trees, much of which will be accessible to the public.
You mentioned rooftop gardens, and we have a few of those around the city. So aside from when people think of trees at street level, are there other alternatives that we could do as well?
Yeah, so this came up in the council meeting yesterday. Because again, I feel like, so many different issues in Vancouver, whether we're talking about childcare or housing or trees or dogs or whatever, a lot of it, the challenge is the lack of space, right? We just don't have a ton of space, and trees take up space. And if you want to be digging up pavement to put trees in pavement, then that costs a lot of money. And anyway, so to your point about kind of different solutions, ABC Councillor Mike Klassen proposed an amendment on the floor of the meeting yesterday, directing staff to look at different possible solutions other than just planting trees as ways to cool down areas, especially areas that are tree deficient, to sort of add vegetation and greenery and cool the areas down. And he mentioned specifically there's a company out of Spain that builds these vegetable awnings or vegetated awnings, I think they call them, where it's kind of like a sail-shaped awning that could go over a walkway or an alleyway. And you see them in some places, especially in Europe, where they have like sails kind of covering a pedestrianized
Oh,
walkway
yes.
or an
Yeah.
arcade or something. The idea, it's similar to that, but it's like a sort of net with flowers and grass growing on it. And so
Huh.
it's kind of like a green awning. And so they have them in some cities in Spain and Turkey and England. So he's at basically, he's asked staff to look into this anyways. And now I don't know exactly, how cost effective it would be, or if it's
Right.
it presumably would be way faster than waiting, because when you plant a tree, it's not providing a ton of shade right away, right? It takes a long time.
Yeah.
These awnings presumably would be faster. They might be more cost effective. I'm not sure that's exactly what city staff will be looking into now, I guess.
Well, you think of some of the alleys like in downtown and downtown east
Downtown.
side, those I guess
Yep.
could be good candidates for something
Yep.
like that.
And it's city planning. They're planning more of these kind of pedestrianized alleyways between
Right.
different buildings downtown. Now, in some cases, they are already shaded, but some of
Right.
the alleys less so. Like there is a lot of sun, and there could be a desire for some more shade.
Okay. Well, great. Well, we'll see what the city comes up with. Hopefully, it
Yeah,
sounds like they're looking around the world for ideas and see
yeah,
what they
exactly.
come back with. All right. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Harold.